I think the interesting part of that is we're very balanced, which tells you that the second weekend and the third weekend, we're going to have really good holds here. We can expect a very long play globally because of that water cooler kind of FOMO experience that people want to be part of the moment, and they want to see it in what they perceive as the most premium manner possible.
This is the Box Office Podcast. I'm Daniel Loria, the editorial director of Box Office Pro, the pulse of theatrical exhibition. Here once again, joined by my colleague and co-host, Rebecca Pahle, deputy editor at Box Office Pro. And in this week's episode, we are going to be talking about everything on the release of Dune Part Two, the second entry in Denis Villeneuve's growing sci-fi epic. And talking about epics, Rebecca, this is going to be an epic length episode because we have 3 different interview segments because that's how excited we are. Hot new release.
We are covering Dune from every angle here, the theatrical, the historical, and the popcorn bucket of it all, naturally.
Everything you ever wanted to know, but were afraid to ask about the Dune 2 popcorn bucket coming up in the feature segment of this episode. But let's introduce our speakers later today. We've got Jeff Goldstein, the president of domestic distribution over at Warner Brothers, going over some of the top line impact, some of those big highlights of that opening weekend from Dune Part 2. Then we've got Max Every, author of A Masterpiece in Disarray, David Lynch's Dune, an oral history. Will be going over the IP of Dune, why it's been so difficult to adapt, and what to keep in mind when we keep on talking about sequel IP, some warning signs of a, let's say, fraught history of bringing Dune to the big screen, and finishing up the episode, Rebecca, we've been waiting for this interview for a long, long time. The makers of the Dune 2 popcorn bucket.
The podcast is all downhill from here. Sorry, guys. Yes, Daniel, we do have from Zinc Group, which is a marketing company that, among other things, provides entertainment marketing via licensed products. Rod Mason, VP of Business Development, and Marcus Gonzalez, who is their global creative director of entertainment marketing. So he oversaw the team. I mean, it was a whole team of people that had their fingers on, or I guess in, the Dune 2 popcorn bucket, but he was the one who led that team. A really, interesting conversation about the evolution of some of these, marketing products that really turn the focus towards movie going as an act rather than simply going to see the movie.
But before we get into all that, first thing first, the biggest opening of 2024 to date, $82.5 million. That's the 3-day actuals on over 4,000 screens is Dune Part 2. Great start, Rebecca. We didn't know what to expect from this title because, of course, the prior entry opened during the pandemic, day and date on HBO Max.
It did well for what it possibly could do. But yeah, Daniel, unprecedented situation there, and really, I think, unfair to make any definitive arguments about the box office performance of that film. This one, definitively, I think we can say it was a solid opening weekend, and definitely props to the marketing team. And I feel like the narrative around this movie in particular is that you have to see it in premium formats. It was filmed using IMAX cameras. I mean, I just personally myself, it's really tough to find that ticket if you didn't get it a month ahead of time. You mentioned that they're adding like 3:15 in the morning.
Yeah,
IMAX
all week here in New York City.
The demand is there.
The demand is there. I mean, you saw it here in New York City at AMC Lincoln Square, which is my local AMC, like one closest to me. They've got IMAX 70 millimeter there. That location was the highest earning location in North America. It's not a coincidence that the top 5 highest earning locations for this film were all IMAX 70 millimeter locations. I heard from Jeff Goldstein, and you will in a bit as well, that was the first format to sell out. Now, I can tell you this, Rebecca, they are adding over at IMC at that location 3:15 a.m. screenings for a film that's nearly 3 hours long. So you go in on a Tuesday at 3:15 a.m. Don't ask me what time you have to take the train to make it to that AMC on time. You get out of there in time to get a bacon, egg, and cheese, deli coffee, and good luck at work that morning and afternoon. But it's incredible. You see that demand left and right. Now, I have to tell you, I did not see this as a paying customer for the first time because I waited too long. And when I finally went to buy an IMAX 70 millimeter ticket at that location, guess how long I have to wait to see that movie at the AMC Lincoln Square?
I'm guessing months.
Almost, pretty much. March 19th. March 19th. I mean, in week 3 of release, basically. It's crazy.
We're butting up against what Ghostbusters Frozen Empire is the one that's going to replace it in IMAX.
Yeah, that movie better make enough on those IMAX screens because the demand is crazy, especially at these 70 millimeter houses. Now, I did see it in a premium format at the reopening, should I say, of the Regal Times Square location at the largest 4DX auditorium in the world. This is the movie to see in immersive seating, period. When you think about it, the first half of these Dune movies...
riding,
absolutely.
Working, right?
I mean, immersive seating is a technology that works primarily off of seat vibrations. This movie is 100% set on people walking in the sand a certain way as to not vibrate it enough so giant sandworms eat you. For that alone, the experience of watching Dune Part 2 in an immersive seating auditorium, whether that's 4DX, D-Box, MX4D, Luma 4D, any format that you want to see it in, immersive seating for this one, if you want to try it, it's the way to go. Now,
this is the movie, and it's you're going to get your money's worth because it is a long movie, and across the premium formats, we really saw Dune Part 2 take off. IMAX, proprietary third party premium large formats, Dolby Cinema, 70 as you mentioned, Daniel, 48% of the opening weekend domestic gross from Dune Part 2 coming from those premium formats. I feel like you could slot this into the premium theaters at any point.
At any point, in any premium. Honestly, Rebecca, I'll tell you right now, I saw it at a press screening at this 4DX technology. I'd pay for it to see it again in immersive seating. Not only that, this Times Square auditorium for 4DX, they've got smoke machines, kind of like you're watching the Miami Hurricanes from the 80s run out of the tunnel with those like fog smoke machines. And they timed it perfectly. Not too many smells. If there was, it just smelled like a new auditorium, to be honest. But the way they not only activated the motion seating, but the vibrations with the sandworms and those smoke machines, it sounds like a gimmick. It sounds silly. Dude, it worked so well. It worked fantastically well. I think for our listeners in exhibition, if you've got a premium auditorium, you're probably going to be very, very happy with these holdover numbers coming up. But enough of us talking about it. Let's hear it from the president of domestic distribution over at Warner Brothers himself, Jeff Goldstein, coming up after the break, joining me on Sunday after the movie opened to talk about his initial reactions after this great opening weekend. That's coming up right after the break. Obviously, coming into the weekend, you have a difficult comparison to make because Denis Villeneuve has made a number of great sci-fi epics, nothing of a scale where we can really compare in terms of box office. You had a first part release day and date during the pandemic. That doesn't give you the best data point. How did you guys settle into expectations entering this weekend in terms of the domestic market?
We looked at other kinds of adult-driven stories, and then maybe some that are sci-fi. We looked at a number of titles. I think what we look at more than anything, Daniel, was creating a big cultural moment, and when's the best time to do that? And based on that, we looked at Oppenheimer, a number of other titles that, quite frankly, got us close to where we are now.
And talking about that, this title was originally slated to open on November, but obviously picking a new date was central in figuring out a global campaign and really maximizing this franchise's box office in a way that wasn't there for the first part, right? How did you come to this weekend as being the right time on the schedule for this film?
Well, we've had a lot of success in March, not just with Warner Films, but as an industry. So when you look at Warner Films, you look at the Batman, and obviously that was really tremendous. But we've had Godzilla, Skull Island on that date, and there have been a lot of successful films in March. March is an interesting month in that you have rolling spring breaks. So if you kind of hit a movie right, you get college kids, high school kids, and their parents as well. So it was such a natural for us once we realized that we wouldn't have the cast. And when you look at this extraordinary cast, you need to have them do what they did, which is just work the world in publicity. And they did an amazing job.
Yeah, I think it really benefited the film overall as a whole. You're going out there with a full global press launch, great campaign to market this. And a big part of this result, Jeff, as you know, is those PLF numbers, nearly 50% of opening weekend. Looking at your top performing houses here in North America, not a coincidence that those top 3-4 houses are big IMAX 70 millimeter locations. Many of them have multiple PLFs. Can you talk a little bit about that impact and maybe how in subsequent weeks that demand to see this in PLF might help the legs be a little bit stronger than usual on a title like this one?
On these movies that are must see in theaters, audience has come to really appreciate that immersive experience on the biggest screen possible with the best sound in a shared experience. IMAX leads that and has been so successful with us. We've had a partnership with them going back to 2003. And it is absolutely a differentiated experience from the home. And it's no surprise. Not only did those theaters sell out first, starting with IMAX 70, then IMAX Digital, then Standard 70, then other exhibitors, private label, premium large format screens. It just shows you how audiences respond so positively to the cinema experience. I think the interesting part of that is we're very balanced, which tells you that the second weekend and the third weekend, we're going to have really good holds here. We could expect a very long play globally because of that water cooler kind of FOMO experience that people want to be part of the moment, and they want to see it in what they perceive as the most premium manner possible.
Yeah, I think that's really going to be a huge positive. And I also have to tell you, last time I heard you this happy on a Sunday was on the opening weekend of Barbie. And this sort of bookends, I think, a wild ride we've had here between distribution and exhibition.
The commonality, Dan. From the beaches of Venice to the sand dunes of Arrakis. Sand is a winning formula for Warner Brothers.
And that was Jeff Goldstein, the president of domestic distribution over at Warner Brothers, speaking about those opening weekend numbers. A great, great, great result, Rebecca. I think we can all agree on it. But it also brings up a whole other question in terms of where we are right now in the marketplace. I think we all wanted to see a successful film come into the market, a film that is critically acclaimed come to the market, do well in premium formats. There's always been this great potential with adapting the novel. I think there's been a lot of folks wanting to bring this into the big screen. We're going to go into the history of that with Max Every, the author of An Oral History of David Lynch's Dune, shortly, going into those difficulties in bringing this project on the big screen, and also what the limitations of this are, because I think everybody in this industry saw those numbers on Sunday and then immediately Googled how many Dune books are there, and then started counting the sequels that we may be able to see so we could see these results in the future. A word to the wise here. Let's celebrate this success.
Yes, let's not get ahead of ourselves considering how weird and wacky and potentially expensive to make the Dune properties get. Let's enjoy this moment.
Not everything needs to be a 17-part franchise with 13 streaming series. In fact, I'm not sure that model is wholly effective. I think a lot of studios are reconsidering that entire model. Listen, it's important to celebrate it. I am so happy that the film is awesome, that it's a cultural moment, that it did so well. But I will repeat, do we have to have franchise expectations for everything that works at the movies? And that's part of the conversation that we're going to have with Max shortly. Not only the difficulty of adapting Dune, but the difficulty of thinking of Dune and the Dune series as a potential golden goose for Hollywood. Some of the warnings on that coming up right after the break. And we're back here on the Boxoffice Podcast with Max Every, the author of A Masterpiece in Disarray, David Lynch's Dune, An Oral History. You can find that book at any online retailer. It is a step-by-step dissection of everything that led to the creation of David Lynch's Dune in 1984. Max, this book, Dune by Frank Herbert, is a book that has been, I think, beloved by many sci-fi fans for decades and decades. I think a lot of filmmakers have seen a potential in adapting this film. It's always been billed as serious sci-fi, whatever that means. But sure, we'll go with that.
Mm-hmm.
But
Star Wars for grown-ups.
Star Wars for grown-ups. But this is a book that predates Star Wars, of course,
Absolutely.
right? And this is
some might even say seeded Star Wars.
That's definitely in the cards here. And as we know the history of adapting Dune into the feature screen, there's a wonderful documentary out there, released, I believe, in, 2013, 2014, by Sony Pictures Classics. Alejandro Jodorowsky, the Chilean filmmaker working out of Mexico for many years and France, he tried to adapt this project at the height of his, let's call it, midnight film series run fame. The film just is very ambitious, never takes off. It's a production that's stalled. It ends up becoming this great white whale for Hollywood until the De Laurentiis group comes in and attaches another hero of the midnight screening series, David Lynch, hot off the success of Eraserhead, to adapt this project. This project actually comes into fruition, but can you walk us through that process from your research? Sure. What gets Lynch from taking meetings on directing Return of the Jedi for Lucas, turning that project down, and going to this sci-fi epic instead?
The big key there is not Eraserhead, but the movie he did right after, which is The Elephant Man, which was a total departure for Mr. Lynch, because it's a biopic, fairly classy, had a bunch of great pedigreed actors like John Gielgud, Anthony Hopkins, and it was nominated for all these Oscars, made a lot of money. So he was a hot property. The thing is, a lot of the people who saw Elephant Man did not see Eraserhead, including the De Laurentiis.
So they're like, we're getting the director of Elephant Man, but they having no clue at what might be lurking there underneath the surface.
Well, the genius of Lynch is the genius of Lynch lies somewhere in the middle of those two extremes, right? When he can balance that dramatic sensibility that Elephant Man has with the bonkers zaniness that we love from Eraserhead. But does that equal commercially viable film? Like, what happened in terms of like developing this film that, one, get Lynch attached and excited to go into, let's say, a big adaptation that he doesn't directly bring into existence, and two, some of those artistic decisions that lead to what on paper seems like an awesome movie. I think if that De Laurentiis group hadn't come in with Lynch, there could have been another documentary about the great unmade David Lynch's Dune with concept art, and we would have all been excited. Well, the reality, unfortunately, was underwhelming.
Yeah, that's what I'm curious about. I mean, clearly it is not the movie that he wanted to make. I mean, you have Virginia Madsen's floating head in the beginning, and then she just disappears for the entire rest of the movie. Like, clearly, where did it start to veer off and become, I guess, not the movie that maybe they originally intended to make?
I mean, funnily enough, the movie itself is kind of like, a documentary of a movie we didn't get, because, he shot the first assembly cut was about 4.5 hours, and his preferred cut was 3 hours. So there was 45 more minutes of material that was shot and all that, and it's just laying there on the cutting room floor.
Which nowadays probably would get released as part of the original cut.
Yeah, there would be far less of a, obviously Dune Part 2 is almost 3 hours. It's just, people don't bat an eye about that length, but back then the exhibitors were basically like, no, we don't want a 3-hour movie. We need to be able to get as many shows in a day as possible. And even the studio executives who I talked to said, like, nowadays, that would have been totally viable, now that we're in the post sort of Lord of the Rings, Titanic kind of era. But back then, doing a big science fiction movie for what was supposed to be a 4-quadrant science fiction movie, that wasn't what they wanted. And so what we got was kind of, neutered a little bit to a certain extent. Although I don't think they took the weirdest stuff out. They just took like the connective tissue and the character building. We still get like,
what makes the weird stuff work, basically. They took all the things you need in order to make the weird stuff effective and just kept the bizarre aspect.
Yeah. Which is interesting, because I would argue that all of that type of thing, of the connective tissue and the world building, I mean, that's the stuff Villeneuve did in Dune Part 1. He just had a whole movie of that. I didn't love it. I mean, it was 2.5 hours of exposition. I don't think it entirely worked on its own merits, but it's like even a director like Villeneuve, who's certainly adept at this sort of scale, wasn't able to crack the pacing in a way that I think definitely worked.
I think that's
completely
true.
agree with that. Yeah. Max, what was it like for David Lynch even to cram this story, this book, which is, as I understand it, mostly about galactic politics and like the off-world spice trade? How was it that process of getting not only a screenplay, but a cut of the film at 2 hours, 15 minutes? What trade-offs were made other than this connective tissue of the film being dumped aside?
They were automatically making a trade-off by having Lynch do the movie, because Lynch is not really a political filmmaker, or he certainly doesn't see himself that way in those terms, the same way that I think Villeneuve is. Villeneuve is leaning into the politics of it and the idea of, charismatic leaders being dangerous. Lynch wasn't interested in that. And so you get an adaptation that is more concerned with the spiritual journey of Paul Atreides, which is an interesting take. I think it's part of what makes the movie fascinating. But unfortunately, he's also hamstrung by the fact that he has to do it PG. And Lynch chafes under those kind of restrictions, because it's like clearly like, all the stuff on Gidi Prime with the Baron, like, he's using like things like the heart plugs and, all that is kind of a workaround for the really graphic stuff he really wants to do. So yeah, he said he felt like he was selling out right from the jump, so, it's like, I think he put his all into it. He was trying out, a lot of visual ideas and thematic ideas that show up in his later movies. But for the most part, I think, it was kind of a sellout movie for David. And he said he died the death in that way. And then also later died the death when the movie itself was pillaged by the critics and died and, did what it did at the box office.
I think maybe it's important to bring up the fact that in 1984, you're in a post-Star Wars universe, and maybe there are expectations placed on a film of this nature that have to harken back to either the performance or the pacing or the tone of Star Wars that may have distracted a property like Dune, which is very much different in terms of tone and content than Star Wars. But also in terms of the project itself, what was it in 1984 that audiences were unwilling to accept, that critics were unwilling to accept from Dune, that in 2024 we're more than happy to get 5 hours plus of Denis Villeneuve on the same project?
I think part of it has to do with the way the movie was marketed, because, Universal wanted another Star Wars, and Dune is not that. It was going to be that. Like Frank Herbert has pointed out, there are like something like 16 points of identity between Star Wars and Dune. Like there's so many elements that they stole, from like just the concept of the Force to, the fact that Anakin Skywalker has like these twin children, and just so many different things, moisture evaporators, so many ideas were, even the word spice, there's something called spice in the Star Wars movies as well. And so I think that was a problem, because to a certain extent, a lot of ideas were Johnny come lately, and there were good ideas in the book that they just couldn't do because people would be like, oh, you're ripping off Star Wars, even though it's the other way around. So it's kind of the John Carter syndrome, it's like, people saw the trailer for John Carter and they're like, yawn, seen it already, and
it's like, you've seen it already, because literally everything came from John Carter.
Right. So so that was a big problem. And the way the movie was marketed, it was marketed to children. It was marketed with bed sheets and lunchboxes and action figures and all that stuff. And it's really wildly inappropriate movie to be marketed
for children.
The same decade that gave us RoboCop.
Yeah, exactly. No, yeah, like the way they marketed the Villeneuve Dune was they did action figures and they did, Legos and stuff like that. But that stuff was very forcefully marketed at like 20-somethings, 30-somethings. It wasn't like, hey, kids, get your weirding modules. And it's like, I could see a parent taking their kid to the movie and just being like, why does everybody have nosebleeds? Why is there a giant grasshopper in a terrarium with a vagina mouth? Like,
why is Stinky wearing a Speedo?
Yeah. So I think it was they crossed wires, basically. Like they thought they were getting one thing, and Lynch was doing his duty. He was adapting the book. The book is weird. The book is really strange. Even Villeneuve doing a man's job of making the most commercially viable version he possibly could. I mean, it's still weird.
I mean, you have to think at this point with the box office success, there was a question mark after the first one didn't really leave the financial questions answered for the sort of budgets that we're looking at, right? Through no fault of its own, we kind of had to have a proof of concept in the sequel after opening weekend and that demand for premium tickets. You have to think Hollywood is just going to walk into this with open arms.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little skeptical about that. I'm not trying to be Chicken Little about the Dune franchise prospects, but like, I think if you look at the budget, like the budget on this movie is $190 to $200 million, and it's Star Wars budget, and it's never going to make Star Wars money. I don't think that's possible. Like an $80 million opening is pretty low. Like even if you compare it to like, you know, Part Two movies that came out like a decade ago, like Deathly Hallows Part Two or Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, like it's grossing lower than those unadjusted. It is great for theater owners. It is great for audiences to have a quality product out there, a cinema score, you know, really good Rotten Tomatoes.
I saw a video of somebody like riding a homemade sandworm, like around the concession stands of
I saw that too. Yeah. No, like there is a strong fan base for it, but you can't get fooled by that kind of fanaticism because it doesn't necessarily translate across the board. And I think, like I don't know if this is a franchise for little children. You definitely don't have that part of the audience. You know, I think there's just certain quadrants of the audience who are turned off by the material.
You saw them the splits demographically in that opening weekend. It was pretty heavily skewed male from these opening weekend figures alone.
Yeah, which is strange too, because it's like, I mean, Villeneuve has done a lot of work to make the movie accessible to female audiences, has at least 4 major female characters, including Chani Zendaya, who gets a much bigger role in the movie than she does either in Lynch's movie or in the book itself. Like she's a really strong character and they've done great stuff with her. But yeah, like, you know, it sort of ends with her, you know, like a question mark about her and Paul's relationship. So I feel like it definitely paves the way for the sequel. I think people who've seen it are going to want the sequel. But again, I don't know how big that audience is. And I don't know if they, you know, it's also a bummer. Like, I mean, like Dune, the way Villeneuve is doing it is a tragedy. Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, like I do remember Revenge of the Sith did much better than Attack of the Clones, which like I mean, maybe people will buy into and enjoy seeing the tragedy unfold.
But then you knew what you were leading to, so you kind of knew even if it was leading in a bad direction. Eventually, Darth Vader becomes, spoiler alert, Darth Vader becomes a good, you know.
Yeah, it's fascinating what we might be seeing here, because in the 1970s, obviously, we have a whole generation's worth of feel-bad cinema that gets basically cut short by the 1-2 punch of Rocky and Star Wars. Here, we have generations of $200 million movies coming out that are all just bland, plastic, not even feel good. It's feel nothing. It's sexless, neutral franchise IP.
Well,
I agree.
During the beginning ages of the MCU, I mean, that was a big point of why a lot of people liked it, is that it had colors and it wasn't like the it wasn't gritty.
Yeah. It wasn't opinionated. It didn't have any weight. I mean, even the punches seem to bounce off of people, where there's a texture, I think, in Villeneuve's adaptation. It's fascinating here seeing that we have a cultural moment on a film that is the exact opposite in terms of a feel-good quality of the blockbusters that precede it. Is that a warning sign? Is that ushering a new era of blockbuster? I'm not sure, because I think we're already seeing a fatigue on that IP franchise, the way it's been done for the last 15, 20 years at the box office last year. At the same time, like you're saying, Max, I think it's irrational looking at a series that is difficult to follow on a narrative level and just gets weirder and weirder with every progressive chapter, let alone book. It's really hard to think that a studio is going to spend $200 million a pop when they can't sell lunchboxes and bedsheets on it.
Right. And, also you've got the above the line issue too, where you've got a huge cast, and they're going to get pricier as these movies go on. Like it might be almost impossible to do the next Dune movie and not spend, close to $300 million. If they follow the book, you're not going to need Rebecca Ferguson. You're not going to need Josh Brolin. You're definitely not going to need any of the the Harkonnens.
Spoiler alert, kind of. You're going to have to bring Momoa back somehow.
Yeah, you will get Jason Momoa back. He's not cheap.
You have the same problem that you would have had David Lynch's original cut gone into the cinemas of, I think theaters are good with the running time, but this one, because clearly there's demand for it. They're adding like 8 a.m. IMAX screenings. I can't imagine seeing this at 8 a.m. But yeah, I just can't imagine that the audience, I don't know. Once you've gone epic, you can't go unepic. That's where we are with runtimes, right? Nowadays, if you put out a well-done, interesting, audience-friendly movie and it's 90 minutes, people are going to feel like they've been cheated because you go see it. All the big movies have to be 2 hours and 30 minutes plus.
It's an experience.
I think we need to roll that back, but I don't know how that happens.
It's so hard. I think that's such a good observation, and maybe a core difference in why this project maybe came out at the wrong time in 1984 with those post-Star Wars expectations at a time when exhibitors are expecting a short running time to pack in showtimes, to today, where movie going is a lot more fragmented, where a movie ticket is a lot more expensive, and people are demanding the most expensive ticket. So it's an experience, a night out. And if you shell out a premium price for a premium ticket and get a 90-minute movie, do you feel like you're getting your money's worth at the end? That's a really good question. I think the moviegoer of today is so different from that of 84
yes,
in a way that just sets the stage for this property to succeed. Now, as you say, Max, there's a ceiling here through no fault of the film itself, and it's not a comment on its quality. We don't want to take this thing that's working and commercialize it in a way that hurts the film's quality. But there is a ceiling in terms of just how much money we can rationally expect this property to make.
Yeah, like everything is in perspective, this movie made 81 million this weekend domestically, and everybody is, throwing up their hats in the air and cheering. But when Solo, a Star Wars story, made $85 million 6 years ago, people were like, oh God, Star Wars is over. It's done. Right.
And that was Max Every, author of a masterpiece in disarray, David Lynch's Dune: An Oral History. A wonderful, wonderful book. Rebecca, you've got a great-looking hard copy of that on your shelf at home.
It is a handsome book for anyone who has a Dune friend having a birthday coming up or something like that.
Now, a big part of the experience of watching Dune for contemporary audiences isn't just the film itself, isn't just the premium format, but as I think a lot of us realized or discovered about a month or 6 weeks ago when we went to Reddit, are pictures of a specific popcorn bucket design for one major circuit, exclusive to that one major circuit, on Dune 2, that was, let's say, reminded folks of different products, maybe for different settings. And I think the first thing, it had a charm to it, right?
Has a look to it, definitely. And kind of the photo was circulating around, we'd seen it, you get a chuckle. And then it pops up in an SNL skit that goes viral the next day. We definitely knew we had to try to track down the people responsible for this, who, as it turns out, were also completely taken by surprise by the virality of this Dune 2 popcorn bucket, especially considering the fact that they initially made it when the movie was initially pre-strike, supposed to come out last year in 2023.
Our first question was, who came up with this thing? And it started a process of us looking for the professionals that not only make this, but many other popcorn buckets, to have a serious conversation about the entire concessions collectibles business. And Rebecca, it is now nearly impossible because of that viral fame or infamy, depending how you want to look at it, on this Dune 2 popcorn bucket. It is now nearly impossible to find these at AMC locations. If you go to eBay, these things are retailing, these Dune 2 popcorn buckets, between $45 and $500 each. But without any further ado, we're going to let the creators of this popcorn bucket finally answer those questions that we've all been wondering about. And we're back here on the Boxoffice Podcast with Rod Mason, VP of Business Development over at Sync Group, and Marcus Gonzalez, the Global Creative Director on entertainment marketing here at Sync Group. You guys have done a number of different popcorn buckets in the past. We're going to go into detail on all of that. But let's start at the beginning. Rod, how did you first get this assignment to make a popcorn bucket out of Dune? Can you walk us through that process?
So what happens is we try to work about 12 to 14 months out from the launch of the movie. What happens is we secure the license, the IP from the studio. So in this case, it was Legendary Pictures. And they give us all the assets, and then Marcus and his team go to work on the brainstorming part of the business. So basically, we kind of have two directions that we approach things at. So we're given like the seller guide and some assets, sometimes some backstory, sometimes not, about what's going on. Of course, with Dune, it's a little bit easier because
there's a movie before, and there's a lot of books. And
yeah. But the challenge here was, the 2D stuff's easy. It's the flat art. You do it so that it's going to be printed on like a tin or something. Mm-hmm. But the bespoke 3D, the customized stuff is a little bit more challenging. So you kind of start going back and forth, like what's iconic in the books, what's iconic in the films. Mm-hmm. And my team, the studio, and I were just kind of shooting around what's going to work and what's not going to work. And we couldn't quite figure out what to do, but we just kept going back to the worm. Because we talked about doing the paint box, and we talked about doing some other things, but we just kept going back to the worm. So we know the worm is one of the most iconic things in the movie. So what are we going to do? And we kept going back and forth. Do we do a full worm? Do we not do a full worm? And finally, we landed on this. Hey, let's do the worm on the top, and let's take it one step further. Wouldn't it be cool if you can stick your hand in there and take the pop part out? And then figuring out what are we going to do for all the teeth. So we kind of like worked through it and kind of joked around about it and ended up landing on what we did. So one of my guys ended up doing a 3D the next day, and we kind of started working that through the process, trying to figure out if it's feasible. So that's kind of one of our challenges is as we go through the development process, we also want to be able to push the envelope and figure out what haven't we done before and what's going to be a little bit different than what we did in the previous movie. So this one had a lot to do with, the sensory thing about sticking your hand into a popcorn bucket to pull out the popcorn and have it be there. We didn't really think of it as an ick factor, but to some people, the mentality of the worm thing automatically sets them up for an ick factor. So that's kind of what ended up happening.
What are some of the other custom popcorn boxes you've done before?
Last year, we had a few big ones that ended up being very popular. The one that always resonates with me is the 20-sided popcorn, the 20-sided dice for Dungeons & Dragons.
Oh, that sold out. I wanted one. I couldn't. That was neat.
That was actually also like a random pitch. We were at the licensing show last year and we met with Hasbro, or not last year, the year before that. Mm-hmm. And we were working on like, do we go after this? Do we go after that? What are some interesting titles? So we met with that team, and I just quickly doodled a few things on a piece of paper. And I said, could we do like a 20-sided die as a popcorn bucket? And, it wasn't directly tied into the film, but it was tied into the Dungeons and Dragons universe. So the licensor went back and checked with their people who, went up the chain to like Wizards of the Coast. And they're like, well, this isn't something we kind of planned for, but that's a really cool idea. So let's try and make it happen. So they made it happen on their end. So we ended up being able to make it on ours, which was really cool because that particular one, once it came out, it sold out in a matter of days. Because this all kind of began back in 2019, where what happened is we've always done 3-dimensional items, and they've always been kind of good. But when we first started the business here in the US, the biggest objection was, well, it doesn't fit in a cup holder. And in 3 years, we went from it doesn't fit in a cup holder to doing an R2-D2, which was about 18 inches tall, and has, holds 140 ounces of popcorn and 44 ounces of drink. So that was done for The Last Skywalker. So that then set the table for a lot of this stuff because we did that for AMC exclusively. And we don't divulge numbers, obviously. They did a lot of these and, they bought them for X and they sold them for X plus Y, and made a lot of money. So they realized that from a business model, this was actually very good because, how the cinema business works. They don't make a lot of money from the ticket sales. They make it from their concessions. So this was a good way to encourage collectors to come in. And then we all know what happened with the pandemic. And, since then it's been kind of all AMC, Cinemark, and Cineplex in Canada have all pretty much committed to doing these larger popcorn containers because they know it makes them money. And now, we're doing a lot of development for Regal too, because they're the last to come to the table, but they're now getting it. So you will see a lot more of this. And this is the thing, from a sales perspective, what we're trying to, and what we're trying to do with these guys is give them a distinct, Marcus and his team are very good at this, give them a distinct point of difference between, a Regal, an AMC, and a Cinemark. Part of it is kind of changing the paradigm in terms of the way they're thinking. So as Rod was saying, with AMC and the R2D2, didn't fit in a cup holder. So in my previous life, I worked at Disney developing a lot of things too for theme parks. And it was the same challenge about we needed to stack and we needed to nest and we needed to do all these things. But then at the end of the day, the product was so cool that guests wanted it. And they ended up scrambling to assemble them ahead of time so that all they're doing is giving it to the guests. So, at some point you also have to think about, all right, we'll try to make it nest. We'll try to fit as much as we can in cases. But ultimately, if it's just so cool and we all have that feeling that guests are going to want it and it's just going to fly off the shelves, then, it negates all that because you're going in and just trying to fulfill the requests and getting these things out there.
As Marcus says, he came from Disney. We do a lot of business with Disney theme parks and also Universal and a few others, SeaWorld. And, what they've recognized is that if they do something in one of their parks, it's the only place you can get it. And we've tried to kind of take that model to the cinemas. And, it's like anything. It takes a little while for people to realize this is a good idea. And now everybody's kind of realizing it is a good idea.
I think one of the most interesting things to learn about this process, not only ourselves, but our listeners as well, is just the amount of time that you guys need to be able to get a design, get it approved, get it ready. You mentioned it was about 14 months on this one. I have to ask, with a Dune 2 popcorn bucket, did you get any notes? Did anybody see the final design and ask maybe any questions on what it could possibly resemble? Maybe a different idea to come into it.
I mean, obviously, as you guys realize, you understand the licensing business. There are a lot of approval steps, during the process before you get to a finished product. This was reviewed by us internally, by the Legendary Pictures, the licensing house. It was also reviewed multiple times by AMC. And, as I said earlier, I don't know whether you were on the call when I said this, Daniel, but this sat at our office for months and no one made a comment.
And then it hit social media and
Yeah, but then the internet, then social media, and the rest is history.
Yeah, I want to go into the viral nature of it because, of course, it's not a one-off. The concessions merchandising has been around for decades, and the envelope has been pushed in terms of creativity, in terms of what it can mean for exhibitors coming out of the pandemic in maximizing their F&B bottom lines. We've come up with several examples. A D&D popcorn bucket you came up with. There was a Barbie convertible one. There was a Super Mario Brothers, those little icons with the question mark that you used to punch. So many great creative examples.
We did that too.
So there you go. So there's so many different ways that you can come in and literally think outside of the tub in bringing these concepts together. But rarely do they get the virality that this popcorn bucket got mentioned in the Jimmy Kimmel monologue in his late night show.
I mean, when did you find out about SNL, that SNL had done?
Yeah, an entire skit from SNL. When did you first start hearing rumblings that this might have a life outside of the original intentions when you guys set out to work on it?
Well, I got to be honest with you, everything was a surprise to us. I mean, it really was. It was one of these things where I honestly can't stress enough. There was never a note given. There was never a comment made, nothing along these lines. And then, when it went viral, we didn't know about the Saturday Night Live skit until after it came out. In fact, I don't think Legendary Pictures even knew about it. Did they, Marcus?
As far as we knew, they didn't know about it. And then, that skit came out and, one person made a comment and next person made a comment. And by the next morning, the SNL broadcast had been edited to just that skit. And that's what ended up going around. But by morning the next day, hey, isn't this you guys' name? And it just...
You're getting text.
Wow.
Text.
I mean, there was the first picture that someone got that was supposedly some candid behind the scenes photo of check this out. And that kind of gained some momentum. And there was a lot of Reddit posts and stuff. And then It's just one thing after the other. You had the Jimmy Kimmel, you had the, all these other things, and then all of a sudden SNL.
Yeah, we'd seen the images and the stuff, but it's like once it got past the terminally online, social media, it's just an entirely different, and obviously, you're able to lean into it. Clearly, the cinemas want to lean into it. I mean, who was it with initially? AMC and Cinemark?
No, it's just AMC. It's exclusive to AMC.
Oh, okay.
In the US. I mean, there's a bunch of websites, or actually they're not websites, they're social media accounts that actually follow all of this stuff, which I'm sure you guys are all aware of. And I don't know how they get them, but they get a lot of images of the stuff that's being produced, not just by us, but by others. And it's not just in the cinema space, it's in the theme park space as well. And they publish this stuff online because they're trying to, because people collect this stuff. And they really create a market. So I don't know where this one came from. I think it was a Reddit post initially, wasn't it, Mark?
There was one Reddit post where, supposedly the story was, this is a picture of the Dune 2 popcorn bucket that was taken, behind the scenes at AMC or something. It was a prototype, or I don't know exactly what it was, but that's kind of the story they told. And all of a sudden people started talking about it. And, of course, a lot of people instantly went in that direction, which wasn't the direction that we, as Rod said, we weren't thinking that even during the brainstorming sessions. We were just thinking about something cool and different.
Yeah, we don't really design for social media interaction. We just design.
It's fair. It reminds me of the AMC Nicole Kidman ad, how it initially, people were kind of making fun of its earnestness, I guess. Daniel, would you say that's an accurate way of filming it? And now people love it. They're selling merch with the, Yeah, I definitely think a lot of the cinemas themselves, the chains, the vendors in the space, I mean, there's a lot about the by-the-minute nature of social media that they're not equipped to be tapped into.
AMC is a great partner, and they have a great marketing team, and they really do. They get behind this stuff, and they, just like us, we don't want to see this out too early, because if it goes out too early, kind of spoils the surprise of when the movie comes out. And there's a double-edged sword. If people don't like it, then everybody gets stuck with a whole bunch of excess inventory, which nobody wants.
And talking about your partners here, one thing that I loved is there's a virality to this. And beyond the giggling stage, what comes next? And what came next, I think, was a leaning into the internet fame of this, not shying away from it, saying, yes, this is a social moment where we are talking about a popcorn tub. It is ours. Let's openly, enjoy and celebrate this concept, that campiness. Can you go into that embracing of the concept to where it is now, where it seems like this is going to be a collector's item, guys? Online, I'm seeing pictures of people buying this at their trips to go see Madame Web, at their trips to go see Bob Marley, One Love. There's an excitement about getting their hands on this item.
I think it's pretty clear that we live in an age of social media and instant gratification and all that sort of stuff. So I think if you can actually show, I've got the Dune popcorn bucket, it kind of elevates your coolness, if you will, But from the perspective of the partners, there was a little, when it first hit and it first started going viral, there was a little bit of concern on all parties.
It would be negative attention, yeah.
I mean, because let's face it, you can't stop a breaking wave. You just got to kind of go with it. As I said, there was a little bit of concern from everybody, but it's interesting reading, the comments on these social media posts, and some people are like, oh, whoever designed this needs to get fired, and it's the worst piece of marketing ever. And then somebody else is like, oh my God, it's the greatest piece of marketing ever because everybody's talking about it.
This is, not exactly like Barbenheimer, but it's the same sort of online buzz around movie-going, around something exclusive to movie-going and the experience of movie-going. And of course, this popcorn tub is part of it. And this, we're seeing from the designs that you already brought out to market in the last several years, this seems to be something that is going to continue across the industry.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely 100% right. I think it's one of these things where, we try to design with the movie in mind and the movie audience in mind. And, I don't want to sort of tell Marcus how to do his job because he does it great, but we really do try and design it with the movie in mind. And if it's not a real blockbuster, or we don't think it's going to be a real blockbuster, then you're not going to see something that's so iconic probably, because people just don't identify as much with things like the Dune popcorn bucket or the 20-sided die or the Minions airplane or, things like that, or the R2-D2. So that's where Marcus and his team are so fantastic, because they are able to put their finger on the pulse of what's going on 12 months out. That's no small feat.
You have to
The
make
challenge too, there's that, 12 months out, we may not have a style guide. So the challenge is trying to also design relatively out of thin air, but knowing, like in this case, we knew the worm was iconic. We know that in different things, there's iconic characters or creatures or objects. And ultimately the template is making sure it has that resonant nag factor with the collectors. It's an impulse buy for some and not for others, but it's that I'm going to the movie theater and I'm going to the concession and holy crap, look at that worm bucket or whatever. And it's like, I have to have it. So every time you see it at home, it reminds you of watching a movie and the movie experience, and you tell your friends about, look at the thing that I got. So that's kind of, those are some of the same basic factors that feed into a lot of the whole social media experience as well. So it's a matter of which one's really going to catch on and which one's kind of not. So in this particular case, especially because it got out a little earlier than expected, it went viral. But we still have successes with like the one I mentioned with the 20-sided die and even the Super Mario, where people connected with the icons of it, again, the nag factor, and I have to have it.
And that was Rod Mason and Marcus Gonzalez of Sync Group, the company that not only came up with this Dune 2 popcorn bucket, but many other collectible concessions, materials. Well, thank you again for listening. The Box Office Podcast is produced in collaboration between Box Office Pro, the Box Office company, and Record Edit Podcast. New episodes every Thursday, so don't forget to subscribe. And if you work in this industry, don't forget to advertise. It's the way that we can continue promoting your companies, promoting your products. There aren't too many outlets that specialize in exhibition. We're proud to be one of the few of them that do. Thank you again for listening, and we'll talk to you again next week.